Welcome to Socializing Security, where every week we have a discussion about security, compliance, and beyond.
Our goal is to learn and grow by socializing each week's topic with each other, our guests, and with you.
A quick compliance note, this podcast is meant for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal or regulatory advice.
We're glad you've joined us, and we hope you'll learn along with us.
Welcome to the HERS conference. So we're going to bring on Eliza as well. And then we have Jean and Kim joining us as well to talk about the End Workplace Abuse movement.
This is a topic that Mila and I have talked about on the podcast before. So excited to maybe dig a little bit deeper into this topic this time, get a little bit wider experience. I would recommend that everyone go and listen to the episode of the podcast. And wherever you happen to be watching or listening to this, we'll include a link to that so that you can go back and hear our original interview with Kim, which was a great one. I actually kind of listened to it a little bit last night to make sure I was ready for this one again. And it's kind of fun to go back to the archives sometimes. So I guess real quick, let's start just by doing introductions for everybody here. Maybe a sentence or two as to kind of who you are, what perspective you're going to bring to this conversation. So Kim, we'll start with you.
So Kim Williams, founder of the Fair Path Project and spokesperson for End Workplace Abuse. And so I founded the Fair Path Project to focus specifically on executive abuse and reinventing HR in a way that is better able to protect people from toxic workplaces.
Cool. And Jean?
Dr. Jean Holloway. I'm an organizational psychologist. My main role, I focus on helping small businesses grow, focusing on looking at behaviors that increase leadership capabilities. I really focus on supporting that first to second year in business, really, and looking at all the aspects of how businesses scale. I work also currently in HR in OD kind of capacity, organizational development. I'm over organizational culture. And in that, I do all kinds of assessments to focus on the workplace culture, hybrid versus remote, things like that. And so been in the space for about 15 years and really excited to be here today.
Cool. Thank you. Eliza, you're up next.
Great. I'm Eliza. I am a people and operations enthusiast. I spend my time these days working on HR and startups, really focused on building strong cultures that lead to workplaces where people can thrive in ambiguity.
Cool. Do we need to introduce ourselves at this point?
Well, y'all know who I am at this point, but I want to just take a minute to, again, just say thank you to Kim and Jean and Eliza, and obviously always Brian. But the way that I know all of you is so unique, and I'm so grateful. And I am one of those people that I meet folks in interesting ways always. And so Kim was actually one of my first clients, and she really kind of helped me figure out what it was going to look like for me to actually consult on the side while I was actually, working a job with Eliza. And, and then Jean, I got to meet at Kim's incredible launch event in DC back in December. And so even better that Jean happens to be basically we live not very far away. So we flew into DC and then realized, we're Texans as well. So I'm so grateful for y'all. And I'll say again, we are recording this and we are trying to create some community here. Some of the stuff that we're going to talk about in this particular session is hard stuff. And so those are the things that, again, we're going to be really mindful of. I'm going to speak on personal experiences. I think Jean will as well. I think I can say as a compliance professional and an attorney, I'm always really grateful when I have strong relationships with people ops leaders. It's not always that way. Unfortunately, I think culturally, HR can seen occasionally be as not the team that you're supposed to go to when something goes wrong. And so we're going to talk about things like that today, about what it's like if you're in that type of scenario, and then also who you can reach out to and how internally we can try to protect whistleblowers. So that's really our goal today, is really when we're talking about equity, it's something that fortunately that word has become so controversial, which is such a bummer because ideally we all want to be treated like good humans at work. And so that's really what we're hoping to talk about today.
One question I want to ask to the HR people, and putting that in air quotes, because my question to the three of you really is, what terms should we use? And I know each organization will name it different things sometimes, but I guess as I was preparing for this, I'm like, should I call it HR? Should I call it human resources? Should I call it the people organization? Should I call it the culture committee? I'm curious from the three of you what your perspective on that term is, because I know that the term itself is controversial these days. It feels like a lot of people don't like being called, well, I'm a human, but I'm just a resource to the company. So I guess I'm curious if any of you have a strong opinion on that before we even start the conversation.
Yeah, I think there can be some stigma around HR. You especially for folks who are newer generations in the workplace. I think when you say HR to them, they're like, HR works for the company, not for me. I think I see so many workplaces choosing things like people operations or employee success or, employee partnership. And I think the way that you choose to name your team within your organization and kind of frame why you're choosing that name can have a big impact to create more trust than just calling it HR.
Yeah.
We definitely HR has a branding problem, and I've heard it referred to as neither human nor a resource. And so I do think people view it with suspicion, and that's probably well deserved. So I use all phrases interchangeably, I guess, depending on who I'm talking to. But ideally, you are supporting your people, and by supporting your people, you're also supporting the organization.
Yeah, I would agree with Kim on that. Definitely, I'm more traditional, so human resources, I have been operating through them, but I see myself as like partnering with HR in order to help them to be more efficient in many ways. And many times the stigma, it's very hard to shake from organization to organization. They're called the police of the organization. They're more about the organization than the employees. And so there's efforts to combat that. And that's kind of why we kind of come here today, just to make sure that we're combating that and helping HR to be that place where it's a safe place, a safe zone. And I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done. So,
Cool. Well, thank you all for that. So let's start with some of these personal experiences, Mila, that you mentioned. Again, kind of thinking through our archive of episodes, you've definitely flicked at the topic before that I
Mhm.
think you want to kind of start with. Obviously, only share what you're comfortable with, knowing that the world is watching. But yeah, tell us about your major experience when it came to not only dealing with HR, but also dealing with kind of a toxic environment and bad things going down.
Yeah. Yeah, obviously I'm a lawyer. And so I know more than most and I'm grateful for that background of also understanding, what is considered harassment at work or what is considered inappropriate behavior, right? What is considered just a policy violation versus something that's like, oh shoot, I really need to talk to human resources about this. I need to bring this to the attention of my boss. It's really tough when you work for someone who's not the right fit for you anymore. And so I can actually say I'm standing here at about a year almost to the day that I got let go for the first time in my life. I was fired. And it was super unexpected and I was not planning for it. And it was because I just had a bad boss and he and I were not the right fit. And the worst part was is I actually tried to work with HR to actually fix that and to be like, "Hey, something is going on, right? Like I know enough to know that I had to document everything." And so suddenly when I started getting hints to being like, "Hey, like something is something's going on and I'm not totally sure why and I don't know what I did." And so the first thought, right, was, "Oh my gosh, I need to document everything and need to make sure that I'm being super mindful of who I'm communicating with." And I was very active of making sure I did bring in HR early, which did end up helping me longer term because they were aware of the issues. It wasn't like I was blindsided and they didn't know what happened. It was pretty clear of like, "Hey, like, this isn't the right fit anymore and we're going to figure out how we can just like move forward as, just separate separate entities, and I'll say I'm so fortunate because in that moment, I had people to call, and I had resources so that I could speak with my own lawyer, and I could speak with somebody like Kim. I'm so lucky, and I think many people will say this, Kim is the first person you should call if something goes wrong. It's literally why she's building the Fair Path Project and why she's so passionate about the end workplace abuse movement, because she's also been through stuff like this before, and so I happened to be working with Kim as her consultant and suddenly I was like, "Hey, like can we have more of a personal conversation? I think something's really wrong." And so again, I think the thing that I really care about as being an advocate of saying like, I'm not embarrassed that this happened at all. This was totally out of my control and it was super tough. And I'll say that as like if you're dealing with just a toxic workplace and whatever that looks like for you, realizing that like it's not forever and you're going to fight your way out of it. And also, you do need to rely on other people. It's not something that you should be doing alone. I think a lot of us suffer in silence on these things, especially if we're like, well, I don't have any other options and this is the best option for me right now. But realizing that like it's really powerful to actually reach out to folks and be like, hey, something is happening and I need help. whether that does not mean you have to go like sue your employer or anything like that. It might mean that your friends are now like, hey, let's help you find a new job, or hey, let's figure out other ways for you to do what you want to do. And again, relying on that community, I think, is a really like impressive thing. I'll say too, when I was pretty open with folks about this, about being like, hey, this happened, and the amount of people that were like, hey, I've been through something similar was eye opening.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. It's never an easy situation to go through, much less talk about, much less deal with in the moment. So, Gene, I think you have a similar type of story, not a similar story, but a similar type of story that you said you were willing to share.
Yeah. I didn't happen to have Kim as a resource through my difficult time. She knows that as I shared my story, but I had got an offer at a very prestigious university that services American, I would say, Air Force. And so at this place that I was supposed to go at in a very high position on the very first day, this was during COVID. They said they made an error and they could not offer me the job after I already had got a house out there. It was in another state, and I was just very, very frustrated. Filed some claims, felt like it was discrimination. I couldn't understand why I was being treated this way. It took about a year of battle of dealing with very, very difficult people who would just treated me as if I did not deserve anything, and I worked so hard to get there. That taught me a very valuable lesson in that. Well, that's the first time that ever had happened to me, where I moved to across the country to a whole nother place. But in that, I end up a beautiful thing that came out of that is in the midst of depression, I began to think about what I really want to do with my life for the next 20, 30 years. And it wasn't keep climbing this corporate ladder and deal with different people. It was like, why don't I go out and help people who get into some of the things that I get into and help them to thrive and form their own business? And it took me about a year of court battle. And in the end, they still didn't want to settle and do what they needed to do. But I formed my LLC. I formed a nonprofit. I was on fire. It was an exciting time. So something that was so difficult just birthed the energy to really focus on myself and focus on my gift and helping people. And I never looked back since then. And that's been about 5.5, 6 years. The LLC growth has been tremendous. I served and end up working in places like NASA and other places doing amazing work. But it all started from uh, having to deal with very difficult people in the workplace who were doing things illegal and who can get away with it. So I made a commitment back then and still have kept it to always try to help those who are in business to understand these things, and so that they're not taken advantage of and that they can be empowered. And that has been like the cornerstone of my business. From that, I end up forming other types of businesses to where I'm working with the youngest and the newest type of consultants that are going into the workforce. And that's been exciting to kind of help them to think about how they help organizations, and always looking for ways in which organizations struggle. So my research that I did in my PhD had to do with job satisfaction and being an authentic leader. So go figure. And when I went through that, it was like, okay, I'm going to prove everyone wrong. You can be authentic and you can help people to be satisfied in their workplace. And that has helped me to go from a couple of great companies, Booz Allen Hamilton, to working in local government here in Travis County, to also owning my own LLC. So it's been an amazing journey, but it's great to have people like Kim. I didn't have that at the time, but she's probably going to be connected to me for the rest of my life in many ways. I'm serious.
Yeah.
Because she gets clients, she gets people, they need help. And if she says, hey, I need you on this, or can you help me? My focus is on helping HR to be healthy. But many times she knows they're just not. And these
Yeah.
executives and these people that are there are going to do bad things. And people sometimes have to be sued in order to change their behavior. And that's why there's insurance and all these other things that goes on. My thought is people can change, positive psychology, if you really kind of work at helping them to change. And so I think it's a great combination that we will have to kind of help the workforce to remain healthy. And then those who are not healthy, they'll seek Kim, or help the people who are victims.
I'm just gonna send everybody to Kim.
Well, I mean,
Yes.
it sounds like defense in depth. Like the things that we deal with in IT is you have to assume that every layer is going to fail at some level. So what's another layer that's going to protect it? So I love that we're getting that layering effect here, just talking about people and their livelihood. Like that's how we survive these days, is by having a job. and being able to earn the income that we need to do things.
And I'll
Um,
say, Brian, last I'll say, it's really hard
yeah,
to speak up. I really applaud what Kim's trying to do because I've even been in places that are very prestigious, even after that situation, and you encounter bullies and people that are doing things, and you want to keep getting your check. And so
Mm.
it's like,
yep.
okay, do I say something? So this is something I'm glad you're going to explore today because it's like it's hard to speak up sometimes and to know what you should do and what your rights are. So thank you for having this.
Yeah, no, I think that's a perfect place for us to start discussing the topic with those two real world experiences out on the table, and what, being able to understand that this happens to people. You mentioned sometimes they get away with it. Like, and I think a lot of us as individual contributors or employees of a company kind of look at a situation like that and say, I mean, yeah, I mean, they've got all the power. They're gonna get away with it. They're gonna have
Mm.
that. And so we start to, on our side as employees, start to kind of put forth the mindset of, oh, I just need to tough it out. This is what it's like to be an adult. You just gotta take those bruises and move on. You know, maybe I just need to maybe I just need to leave the company. And in all situations, those may be the right answers, but not in every situation. And not every situation is going to demand that you just have to suck it up. So that we both, from an HR perspective and from a culture perspective or society perspective and our own personal placements, we put those barriers in place to not deal with these situations and not address it. So I guess, Gene, I'll start with you because you kind of led us into this topic. How did you get over that point of saying, wait a second, this needs to be addressed. This is not something for me to walk away from. This is something that I guess they need to feel the pain a little bit. To put it kind of crudely, is like sometimes they need to learn the lesson, like, this is not appropriate. You should not treat people this way. So maybe, and you don't necessarily have to talk about your own personal situation. I'll let you decide how much of that you want to share, but maybe what you've learned since then mixed in there as well.
Yeah, it was definitely a journey. I had to learn that, hey, maybe what I wouldn't do for me, I need to think about would I let my friend or someone close to me go through this? And the answer was no. I mean, I think that propelled me to go through every meeting. I probably had over 50 meetings with the top people who were in R, who were in employee relations, investigating things. And then it went all the way up to their lawyer that was at the highest courts for that. And at that level, to me, it was less about me to me and less about protecting their organization, trying to find some little loophole. And then eventually I think they tried to pin it on a loophole. But I kind of read through all of that and said, you know what? Regardless of the outcome, I am not going to back down on my statement of what has happened to me and how that is not appropriate and it's not right for anyone to go through that, even if they protect themselves. And I maintained that for that whole entire year. I think that strengthened me. So the whole point behind that is that it became a seed that led to me being able to grow outside of that organization. So I think it's so important. Sometimes you might have to leave or an organization, but what you gather from that can really propel you into the thing you do next, or it can, bring into huge depression and hide. And some people never want to come out. And so I felt like I had to make a decision, and I ended up making the right decision by sticking to my guns. And it wasn't about winning or losing, but keeping my dignity and keeping my statement forward and never changing, no matter the intimidation, because it was very intimidating, some of the people I had to talk to. So
No.
that's how it helped me.
Yeah, and I'm glad you're taking that um to heart, like taking that experience and turning it around to help others with that. Kim, from your perspective, as people approach you, and both Mila and Jane are like, call him first. And so it's that flood of all those people that are going to start calling you and saying, hey, I think I might be in this type of a situation. Obviously, just making that call, even if you're the very first person they've talked to, is a huge step forward of moving past that stigma, moving past that fear of the situation. What do you usually advise people at that point?
I just want to say to Jean and Milo, thank you for your courage. It takes enormous courage to talk about these kinds of experiences. And sadly, you're not unique. I mean, this has happened over to 50 million workers, but it persists because we stay so silent about it. And we can feel shame for it, even if it's not our fault. There's a lot of isolation that comes from that. The people around us may back away from us because they see something bad happening and they don't want anything to stick to them. So as a result, it can be one of the loneliest experiences that people go through. But I think that the fear is the most important thing. Most of the work that I actually do is not to be confrontational, not to, overly sugarcoat things, but I aim to be kind of the nicest bad cop that you're ever going to meet. I believe at my core that without accountability, you have nothing. And so the whole reason why all of this stuff persists is because, we have two sets of rules. We have rules for the top and we have rules for everybody else. And there are a million ways to establish that accountability. And so we look at situation by situation to say, in some cases, it may be a lawsuit. In other cases, it may be a conversation around insurance. In other cases, like Milu is so amazing at, it's about risk mitigation strategies and building out a risk framework that is helping leaders understand that there is a real financial cost and pain that goes beyond vibes and bad things that may be happening to other folks. But with all of this, it's incredibly terrifying stuff because there are power imbalances, because our careers can be at risk. And there's a lot of medical studies that are now out there talking about the impact of what happens when we feel like our job is on the line, particularly if you're in an uncertain job market or in a place like the United States where we don't have the same social safety nets as other places do. It can feel very life threatening very, very quickly. It leaves scars on the brain. They've even done brain studies that show people who've been bullied at work have brains that look like combat veterans because that threat feels so real. So your cortisol will kick in. You will be in fight or flight in a lot of these situations. And if you're not managing that, you're not going to sleep. You're going to experience cognitive decline. You're not going to be able to get yourself through the toughest moment you may be facing in your entire career. And then one of the things that Jane just said that I really, really loved, there is a hidden secret in all of this of standing up for yourself, regardless of the outcome, is it does make you stronger. And you won't be as afraid of this stuff the next time it comes around. And you will show up differently for the rest of your life and the people around you will feel that and you won't be a target in a way that you once were. And so for me, one of the greatest gifts of my own experiences was getting through the incredible fear I felt at the start of the process and then never feeling afraid again at the end of it.
Yeah, that's I love that perspective of PTSD, essentially. Going through these hard employment situations, not to diminish it by saying it's just an employment situation, because you're going through that as a human being can cause long-term harm. And so again, not sitting there and saying, I just need to tough it out. This is what adults have to deal with is not the right answer for sure. Eliza, from your perspective, kind of going to the other side of all of this conversation, if I as an employee get into a situation and I feel like this isn't quite right, I don't know who to talk to, assuming they are comfortable with HR, I guess what do you need to hear from employees that are dealing with a situation that clearly isn't right? That, assuming you're in the seat of I'm here to help our employees because having healthy employees means we have a healthy company. Obviously, if HR is as toxic as the leadership, that's probably not the right way to go. But from your perspective, like what are the things that people should do to engage with HR to maybe take care of a situation um, in the way that would be most beneficial to the company as a whole?
Yeah, it can be so hard to get to that point where you're ready to talk to your people resources, but going to them early is often the best way to handle a situation well and to make sure that you're changing you're setting the social contract within your workplace that these are conversations that need to happen early and there are places where you're expecting support. I really encourage people to come to their people team as early as possible once they start to see issues, even if they can't fully formulate what the issue is, even if it's a feeling or it's one event that just does not sit right. And that people teams needs to be prepared to be the ones to facilitate that conversation, to say, like, all right, like, are we listening? Are we problem solving? Are we building evidence? Which direction are we taking this? Going to those people teams early, and especially, like having, as you settle into a workplace, as you navigate through a workplace, developing a relationship with someone on the people team that you trust, that you're building that relationship with, can be one of the most powerful ways. And if you have good people on that team, they're always willing to say, like, yeah, let's chat about work. Let's chat about what you're experiencing. Let's grab coffee. Let's build that relationship.
Cool. Yeah. Of course, HR is one part of me as an employee interacting with the company, but interacting with our bosses are a day-to-day type thing. And obviously dealing with your manager, dealing with your boss is something you is very hard to avoid. Especially if HR isn't a comfortable place for you to go to. So the reality of having a bad boss and not really, I've been there. It feels like you're just trapped in a box and you just can't escape it. Mila, I know that's a part of the story that you have as well. And again, don't have to talk about specifics there, but what advice would you give people as they're feeling trapped inside that box and they don't feel like they have anywhere to go because they can't skip level that boss because that's just going to cause blowback or whatever that might be?
Yeah, I think it's tough because every situation is different, and I do really think if I'm wearing more of my like, "Hey, I went through this," and my like the human element of it is first off, like take care of yourself and recognize that like I guess if you have an inkling that you have an abusive boss or you're in a toxic work situation, most likely you are. So I think unfortunately it's a relatively universal experience. I think all of us have had a bad boss at some point. But recognizing there's something as being like, okay, like they're a micromanager versus, wow, they are harassing. And so, like, I think the thing for me was really empowering of realizing like, hey, something is wrong and starting to being like, I think I should document things. And again, I think this, as I can say, come like from a compliance perspective, obviously, employee materials, they're confidential, right? So like the work that we're doing when we're working on behalf of an organization, generally like our output and our work product is confidential. That being said, there are other legal protections that also actually trump that confidentiality in the sense that like if somebody is actively doing something that you think is illegal, you as an individual can actually start collecting that information privately to make sure that you have that in the case of litigation ultimately. So, and again, I'm saying that not as your lawyer, but I'm just saying as a friend here of being like, hey, be mindful, reach out to your colleagues, your peers, because there is strength in numbers here too. If it's one person versus the entire culture of the organization, that's going to be a lot harder than you being like, hey, this is happening to me. You can also reach out to different folks like within your team. And then again, reach out to external people, whether that's a lot of law firms, right? They will have just the ability for you to talk to them and they'll do just a consult for free, right? To figuring out like, hey, is this actually, and I'll say I've done that before in the past as well, where I was like, hey, I think this was potentially this thing. And it wasn't. And that was okay. It was a good learning moment to being like, hey, I think this is happening and I have a claim. And they were like, probably not on this one. And again, that was also empowering. So I think knowledge is key here of also just recognizing like protect yourself, truly protect your peace, but then also figure out ways that you can actually, be mindful of how you're talking about things in a way that is respectful, but also making it very clear that like something is wrong because speaking up is powerful.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned external um, connections that you can make and places to go. Are there internal places? We talked about HR. We talked about the boss situation. Um, does it make sense to talk to other employees? Is it my responsibility as an individual going through a bad boss situation that, or an employee that is potentially abusive to multiple people? Is it appropriate to talk to those other people and say, hey, have you experienced this? Are you going through this? What have you done about that?
Yeah, I think if I think about the stakeholders within the organization, right, that like should be considered safe resources. Of course, human resources, whether or not you feel comfortable going to them or not, I think most people know that pretty clear. They're either like HR is my friend or maybe not the vibe in this company. I would say other teams that you can definitely reach out to. I would say compliance is a safe one. They're ultimately like they also do protect the company and have a different level of independence reporting requirements. And they are usually the ones that are also managing the whistleblower like ethics hotline and stuff like that. And I think you could also go to legal if you want. The attorneys again are going to have a different way to talk to the leadership team than HR might even as well. So there are different folks that you can go to. I would also think sometimes going to the peer of your boss or reaching out to somebody who's actually on their level, and being like, "Hey, like can I have kind of a private conversation? I'm having a tough time at work. Could we talk about it? Could I get advice?" I think asking for advice is very powerful here when you're also talking to other leaders that might know the individual that's creating problems, as opposed to saying like, can I, kind of vent or complain. I think if you're really trying to bring them as kind of a strategic partner, being like, I'm not sure how to handle this situation, I think you might get a better response.
I would say, Brian, I know you probably couldn't see, I had my hand raised in the thing. I want to just point
Go
out,
for it.
there are people like who are doing what Kim is doing, because I don't meet quite a few who are doing that type of specific work. And my direct encouragement is reach out to someone like that who can help you to organize your approach, because sometimes we can do things that can hinder the progress, or we can do something that will hurt us because we're in our emotions. I'm actually currently working on a workshop that I'm doing through my group, and that talks about fight or flight and what's happening in our automatic nervous system when we're exposed to constant stressful situations. Hint, with a boss that's bad. Right. So in that, some people freeze, some people get emotional, but it's over time. I'm more concerned about when that continues to happen, you might need to go to a consultant or someone that can help you to really dive into what's going on with it. And Kim can speak more about it, and then help them to have a strategic attack and approach. Because to me, I didn't have that when I went through my thing, and I just had a lot of grit to get through it. And I think if I had some, I probably would even won the case. My goal wasn't to win the case. It was like, I'm going to prove you wrong. And I formed a couple businesses and I still won. But when I think back, if I would have had someone that I can say, hey, these things happened to me. Is there something that I could do about it? Am I saying it the right way? Am I writing down all the right information? This was told to me in a meeting. This was told me, like, it's helpful to have that guidance. And many times we go to lawyers, but then you have someone like Kim who this is what she's devoted herself to do. I think people should take advantage of that. Kim.
And 100% I agree. I mean, I've had situations where I've gone to legal and they were like, too bad, we're not going to help you. Every environment can be political, it can be different. And in some cases, HR is either not empowered or worse, they are in line with management and totally okay with whatever environment is there. But I think one of the ways you can work around that is you document every conversation and you present it in a way that demonstrates liability for the organization. So in other words, you're using HR as a conduit to the folks above them. You're speaking through them by saying, "Hey, I'm raising real risk to the organization." And another point, just to add on to what Milu said, I love the idea of engaging someone that's like higher ranking. But it's also important to remember that if you're bringing, or raising a serious charge, or if you're in discrimination, something like that, even by just discussing it, you've officially let management know, you've let the company know. And if they ignore it at that particular point, that's also a potential liability for them. And so a lot of times what I recommend is you document absolutely everything. You have your own personal log. You can never go wrong by recording too much. And then you can always whittle that down, depending on who you're talking to from then on, and document every time you share that information with someone, every time you've shared it with HR, because there could be a liability for them to ignore a particular type of complaint. But then also how you package all of that up. Like Jean pointed out, this is really scary stuff. It's easy to get in your feelings. It's easy to not show up the right way. And this system tends to reward those who stay calm and credible, no matter how you might be feeling on the inside. And I've had to work through that myself when I'm able to put together a communication that says just the facts, just the time, dates, and events. I let the horrible acts stand for themselves. I don't offer any color, any opinion. And then I point to the policy violations. I point to the potential legal violations. And then I add in the magic words, this is impairing my ability to do my job. You've loaded that up with so much HR code, so much legal code, that it's going to force an organization to pay attention to you or potentially suffer the consequences if they don't.
Yeah, I love the way you both kind of frame that in the languages that you use, even if you're just documenting for yourself and putting it in that language that, hey, there's risk here, there's liability here, there's inability to perform my function properly. I'm starting to lose sleep over this. Like those types of terms have a lot of meaning on the other end of things. Putting it out there to, particularly if you're talking to internal with compliance or HR or whatever, that concept of, hey, I think we've got a situation that is going to introduce risk into our organization, or you're going to start losing employees because of this, and that's going to be a risky situation for you to lose so much talent in such a short time frame. So those are those are great framings for that, definitely.
Brian, can I just add one other quick point
Please
too
do.
that can be really helpful? All the power sits inside the organization. So, what you're doing is signaling to them that you will look well outside the organization and they won't. And so they don't want you to take things outside. But simply by going to your doctor and documenting that can be really powerful too. And then filing a workers' comp claim, even if it's not compensable, it can trigger an investigation. It creates a record. It creates documentation outside of the organization that they can't challenge, and they don't necessarily have full control over that process. So that can also be a really powerful lever for folks too.
Yeah, I like that addition. I'm really glad you added that because that gets us to another topic that I want to pivot to. Before I do that, we'll probably talk for another 15 minutes or so. But if anybody in the audience has any questions, please put them in there for the panel to answer. We'd love to answer some of your questions as well. So as I pivot kind of the next piece of it becomes, how do you protect yourself? And we talked about how do you document the situation? How do you figure out the next step and how to go forward? Obviously, there's whistleblower type protections that are out there. And we generally think about those as, hey, there's something highly illegal happening here. There's money that's being exchanged inappropriately. I've seen those, pretty far removed from me. You hear more about it through the grapevine than you hear about it officially in the situations I've seen firsthand. But we've all seen on the news where we have whistleblowers out there from a government perspective. So I guess I'll just kind of leave this open to the group because I'm not sure who has experience here as to how to protect yourself as a whistleblower, how to go out there and be able to make sure that I love my job. I want to keep my job, but there's this one person that is making it very difficult. And if we can get rid of that one person, it'll help. Kind of to Gene, your point earlier, I can help others by fighting this fight with this one person. I just don't want it to jeopardize my job because I'm single income for a family, and if I lose my job, it's not going to go well for me. So I don't know if any of you have had an experience as a whistleblower, whether it be um, you know the things in HR that you can't get past because a whistleblower has protection, or something more on the legal side of things, or things that you've helped people document. But I guess I'll leave it open to whoever's got a good thought on that.
I do a lot of work with Whistleblowers of America in Washington, D.C., and it's kind of the tip of the spear, I think, in some of the worst retaliation cases I've ever seen. Because they're, particularly if you're going up against a giant organization or if you're going up against the federal government, I have seen where the entire federal government will come after you or large organizations will come after you. They tend to attract some of the nastiest backlash, just to be brutally honest, more so than like discrimination claims or harassment claims or some of these other claims where, yeah, there may be a significant payout, but they don't view it as such a core threat to the business or the operation. And so they can really be loaded for bear with folks that are, talking about because also too, if there's a discrimination claim, you may be paying out a penalty, but there's not usually criminal statutes. And so if somebody's afraid of going to jail, their response is probably they're going to have some big feelings and they're going to approach you very differently. So I would think before calling a hotline, even, I would say, DC is full of whistleblower attorneys. Texas actually has some too. I would consult an attorney before I ever disclose anything internally in that particular case.
Yeah, I think the concept of being a whistleblower, right, ultimately it's a really tough job. And so that's, I think, the thing that, I've been in personal situations at work where, especially as compliance, I wear a different hat, right? So like I've had to leave organizations before where I'm like, hey, there's the potential for serious wrongdoing. And I've had to be like, oh, this is not a fit anymore because I actually, as a compliance officer and a CISO, I actually can hold civil liabilities. And, I'm not going to jail for somebody else's mistake here on this one. So I have also had to occasionally be like, "Ooh, a company's risk profile. They're taking risks that impact me in a way that the other employees might not feel as much." And so I think when we're thinking about someone being a whistleblower, and if you ever experience this where you're internally and someone is like, "Hey, something is really wrong," it's a really great moment to just be like, "We need to protect that person." At the end of the day, because I think it's really sad and a harsh reality for whistleblowers that if they do go public with it, they lawyer up, they go public with it, they automatically lose their job, right? And then they're seen as this like pariah, which is so not the mindset that we should have, because ultimately it's probably someone that was trying to be like, hey, we're not doing the right thing and we should fix this. And so culturally, it's something as a compliance officer that I'm always like, oh man, it bothers me so much when we see whistleblowers being chastised or embarrassed for speaking up when it's actually like they were genuinely most likely trying to do the right thing and fix it. They actually wanted to keep their job. They wanted to stay with the organization. There was still hope for them that they were like, hey, this company is still worth investing in. They're still worth my time. I think they're going to do the right thing and fix it. And unfortunately for that reality, that individual, right? Usually they are ousted. They are like, ostracized from the organization. And then it is harder to get a new job, which is why I do agree with Kim. I think if there's something where you're really starting to think that there's like a legal wrongdoing and it's not crossing like the, hey, this, feels wrong, or you're like, hey, this is really wrong, that is when I would actually recommend do obtain counsel, do reach out and like make sure that you're aware too of like what's going to be the risk to your long term for the reputation. I do think as a culture, we do need to work harder to actually like support whistleblowers more.
Yeah,
100%. Yeah. Sorry. I was just going to say that, whistleblowers have been protected since the American Revolution. They were considered heroes. They saved taxpayers billions of dollars, but the framing around them, there's been a large effort to vilify these folks, but they're usually incredibly people with just huge integrity, enough to risk everything. So I love that.
Yeah, and I mean, Jean, you described earlier how uncomfortable it is to sit in the spot of being the person who has spoken up. Like, completely agree with you, Milu, that we need to encourage these people who do stand up and thank them for the bravery and the effort that it takes to do it. Ultimately, it's a gift.
Eliza, there was a question in the chat for you from Coco. It says, HR, even if they are personally committed to a team member's difficult workplace, they ultimately work for the organization's leadership. Could you please speak a little bit to the balance and how best an employee can raise something to HR without feeling like their trust will be broken and that this information will be shared with leadership? Sometimes team members don't feel like they can trust HR, which seems tricky to navigate. Goes to you,
Yeah.
Eliza.
Yeah, that one, hey, that's a big question, and one that I think is one of the hardest parts of being in HR in a company, because there is that tension, right? Like, I think every person who enters the field of human resources needs to sit with and understand that tension within themselves and really develop some personal values around, yes, I work for the organization, but ultimately creating a healthy organization means supporting the people. And sometimes that means you're going to have to be the one to sit in that discomfort of saying, ooh, like, I know this is not going to be taken well by leadership, but I'm going to have to be the person that helps navigate that translation to try and take what this employee is experiencing and make them feel appreciated for having brought it up and help them navigate the process of being heard and of organizing their thoughts and of, establishing evidence and then helping the organization to hear it. And that process is sometimes uncomfortable and sometimes messy. And I don't think that every HR person always gets it right. But I think it's really important that we're constantly pushing ourselves to improve the way that we do that.
I would just like to say from my experience in HR, by nature of HR itself, the policies and the things that we have to deal with, many times our employees being disgruntled, employee relations issues where people are doing things bad. HR catches a bad rap for dealing with tough, difficult things. But that doesn't make excuse to be treated wrong when you're in HR. So one thing that I found that could be helpful is that you may need to voice those concerns to leadership and higher leadership regarding, hey, these are some concerns I'm seeing about how our culture is, how things are. And it's less personal and it's more of this is a concern that I have. If you don't get any reaction, you take it to the next level. Here's a specific situation that has happened to me. This is why I think it's wrong. This is why I hope to be deal with about it. And if you're going to do something, can you please do something about it? So I think that there's a process that I think you can go through, even when HR has to deal with difficult things all the time, or in situations where HR has a bad rep in the organization. What do you do with that? Should you not complain then? No, you still, if there's something happening that's unethical or challenging and difficult by a leader, you do need to voice it, but how you do it, I think, is important.
So too, to keep a record for yourself.
Yeah.
Like if an employee is having an issue, you want to start a timeline documenting everything that employee is experiencing, but you also want to keep records for how you're dealing with leadership. if somebody's coming to you with, say, like a race discrimination claim and you're bringing that forward, you're engaging in protected activity. Retaliation is now unlawful. And so you need to have a real documentation of saying, if I've been here for 3 years and I have, a good track record and everybody's been nice, and then all of a sudden I come forward on March 13th with a complaint, and then now I'm on a PIP the next Monday. Well, that's a fact pattern that you want to keep a record of and protect yourself, and to let folks know that, in a non-threatening way, you're following process, you're following the procedure.
There's a question, and do you see the question in the chat, Brian? I
Yep.
was going to read it if you didn't see it. Go ahead.
Yeah. This is a perfect question to throw in at this point. Is you know, and I've experienced this as well, as Robert knows. In IT, sometimes we get to situations where there's an outage, there's a security situation, and the pressure naturally mounts. And some of that is healthy. There's a certain amount of pressure that is like, okay, this needs to be your focus. This is the direction we need to go. Leadership it needs an update. Where are we at? Like, that level of pressure can be healthy in an organization, but to a limit, as always. So, Milo, I know that you've dealt with IT a lot in situations like that, where there are security incidences where things didn't go the way they should. So maybe talk a little bit about how as an employee I should view that, how I should deal with it, and more importantly, recognize when it's gone overboard. It's gone from healthy pressure to potentially even abuse.
Yeah, it's a tough one because when you're in the middle of a data breach or a security incident, ultimately, right, it's pretty much the company's like worst day. And so it turns into this very much like we're all going to just like try our absolute best, but most likely, especially the engineers, the IT folks, they are working absolutely nonstop. And so they are really going like really intense to just like try to figure out. And then people like me are asking them 10,000 questions. And even better, I'm asking them like, hey, could you screenshot things? And they're like, no. And so, it's important to have already had strong relationships with those teams. I think this is really where culture becomes really important. Not only where we're talking about the culture of HR and we're talking about employee relations, but actually the culture of the teams that are involved in the actual investigations. Generally, HR is in the room for sure, but making sure that security, IT compliance, legal, and HR are like in lockstep and being like, hi, this big thing happened and we're all going to work. And also recognize occasionally that some of those folks to being like, hi, I need a break. I'm like about to like lose it. And also recognizing that like we're not going to be operating on our 10,000% best because we are super stressed. And so realizing you do need to take breaks, you do need to take space, and also figuring out like, hey, there should be redundancy. I've worked in teams where like it was me, myself, and I, and that's super draining. And so also realizing like going to your leadership team being like, hey, we have this really important thing and it's really scary, but like also we need to figure out how are we like celebrating these folks afterwards. I think that's the thing to me that companies miss often when they're in the middle of an incident investigation, that they stop afterwards and they forget to like applaud the extra hours, because most of this time these are salaried individuals. They're not getting paid extra for suddenly burning the midnight oil. And so making sure that we're figuring out ways to either be like, hey, they need extra time off, or like, hey, after this, like they need to like come up with a plan of like maybe they're going to work part-time for a week or something to like reset. I think those things are really important. And then again, just like recognizing we're probably not going to operate at our best when we're super tired and really stressed. And also giving your team members also the opportunity to be like, hey, I didn't show up the way that I wanted to, and I am sorry about that. And trying to just make sure that you're resetting that human connection after, I think is really important.
Yeah.
Brian, I'd love to touch
Agree.
on go ahead.
Yes.
Kimberly might jump in there too, to touch on the ground for inappropriate culture. So a good example, I had a client who IT company, very successful IT, and most IT companies can be very successful. There's a lot of money in the organization. They do amazing things, but they had that kind of culture to where, CEO was telling the leaders, shut the F up, and, you need to do this and that. In situations where it's high stress and you need to get something done, I understand that your tone may change, but we have to be careful that we don't create a culture to where then those employees who are being screamed at and cursed at, now they're having incidents of domestic violence or some other things are happening outside of that. They may be performing, the company making money, but it's still having a psychological impact on how they treat their children or how they treat someone else. The well-being aspect of it is not healthy over time, no matter how much money you're going to make. And so one incident of seeing how a CEO did that, it really describes why some of the leaders were very timid and afraid, but they were very successful financially. So that's something that I think that should be addressed, that it's just not about financial success. How can some behaviors have an impact on people that we even love because we don't deal with it in an appropriate way? So
Yeah, and I think the honesty and the hard conversations, like Mili pointed out, of saying "I'm sorry" are free. There was an article that came out last week that talked about most of your $1 million lawsuits started out as $10,000 problems. And so, if you screw up, own it. Because like I think what Gene is pointing out as well, and it's a really good point, like people are not going to speak up. So like if a boss is punching down, they're not going to get that feedback, particularly if they're coming across in a scary way. And so that does show up either internally at home or in some other places. And so now you have employees that are dealing with a high stress situation, and then it's being compounded by the behavior of the executive. So I do like the idea of unpacking it afterwards. If people screwed up, if they didn't handle themselves well in stress, I think that is a point of reflection and feedback. I'm someone who comes from the State Department where, embassies are being bombed, things that, I would never make light of an IT outage, especially if a million jobs might be on the line and it's an infrastructure thing, but there's a wide variety of capacity. And I've seen unbelievable composure and, situations where people were dying. So, it is possible. And, we have to make a collective decision to say, what is the line here? But then I also think it's important to recognize too that there are differences in human beings. So the question I always ask in any situation is, was there harm done? If people start yelling at each other and then they can hug it out afterwards and, they're totally fine, and then we're good. And not everybody's going to react the same. But I think it's really important to recognize that not everybody may speak up in those moments. But if some real damage has been done, I mean, you've hurt an employee. And so, having at least those conversations are really, really important.
And I think that's the place where, like, our teams of these teams that are often in very stressful situations can really be the ones to show that this is good behavior. Like being the one to say, "Hey, that was out of line," or like, "I reacted poorly in that situation," can make everyone around you feel safe doing the same.
Yeah. I mean, taking accountability. I mean, we as employees would like the company to take accountability for the pressures and the harms they put on us. We need to be willing to take the accountability for the harms, the situations that we're in, the places that we need to make sure that a simple saying, I'm sorry I did that. You know what the pressure's like. There's no excuse for it, but I want to acknowledge the fact that I did it. Sometimes just acknowledging the bad things you do is enough to make people feel better for sure.
And it is
Um,
stoppable from the point of a power imbalance. If your CEO is freaking out and says, F you or does whatever, but if you turn around and say that to the CEO, you'd be fired on the spot. So people can stop themselves from
Sure.
doing it when they want to.
Yeah.
So if they know there's a penalty to pay. So that CEO is giving in to that frustration sometimes because they know they can get away with it, which is really what it boils down to.
it's
Yeah.
sometimes what creates success too, by them having that type of personality that can order and get everyone in the room to do everything is a quality that got them to where they're at. My question is just that when things get toxic, what does that look like? Do we understand that? Is even HR the place to say, yes, we know how to hold accountable our executives and we are truly define what toxic looks like. And these are the behaviors, as Kim say, that are leading the company to be more liable, right? That should be very clear. And what I'm feeling and sensing in today's times that it's not very clear. It's almost just like, yeah, when it comes to gets to the lawyers and it gets down to, oh yeah, someone's filing a claim or doing something, then they begin to define things and they want to change some policies. Why can't we be proactive and do it before it gets there? We've had enough cases happen. This doesn't have to keep happening over and over again. So how do we stop it? Is my question.
it's definitely a tough line. In a lot of cases, I feel like people kind of just know whether it's right or not. Culture, of course, can be a difference. Some cultures are just naturally. I don't want to necessarily say toxic. Some people may view them as toxic, though. They may be, that really high paced, fast. We're gonna move real big rocks, real fast, real hard, and that may not be for everybody. And so that can definitely be a tough line to determine there. Eliza, I'm kind of curious from your perspective from an HR. as you're building a culture, as you're looking at what's acceptable for interpersonal conversations and whatnot, how do you as HR look at that to make it as healthy as possible? And I guess to the point of what we're doing here from an advice perspective, what can us as individuals do to try to help foster a better culture like that?
Yeah. I mean, I think, especially in this sense, culture at its core is operational. And if you're not building the way that you structure your operations and your processes to kind of create the social construct of calling out places where this is happening and having reflection and training people on what is acceptable communication and behavior, then like no HR webinar on like how to be nice to each other is ever going to change anything, right? So how do we, in the way that we work with managers, like improve the way that people are defining effective communication and setting those expectations with each other as they build relationships? How are we building reflection and postmortems into the processes that we have so people are reflecting on what's gone well and what's gone poorly? And how are we building a community where we call each other out when things do not? With love and kindness, hopefully. Because I think so many cultures, especially me being a startup person, like I hate the phrase like move fast and break things.
Yep.
Cool. So many times people use that as an excuse for breaking people, and that is horrible. We should not be doing that because if our real intent is to move fast and establish like grow big things, we can't do that if
Yep.
we're steadily breaking down the people we're trying to do it with.
No, I love that.
Usually the people who say break things when they're talking about breaking people aren't expecting that to happen to them. So it's a one-way street.
Yeah. Again, going back to the power dynamics that sometimes exist in an organization that make these situations so difficult and fraught is, some people just will break everybody. They'll step on anyone along the way, and that's unfortunately a poor part of our cultures. I think at this point we need to start wrapping up to get ready for the next session because we're rapid firing through things. I see some questions maybe still potentially coming in, so they're potentially things we can help answer offline. But I guess just in the sense of wrapping up, I'm curious for each of you to maybe share one quick thing that we should all leave the session going to do to prepare. Maybe we're in the situation, we need to start dealing with it today. Maybe it's something that we don't expect to happen, but is something that we can do to prepare today should that happen to us in the next job, whatever that might be. So I'm going to start with Kim, and we'll work our way around.
Yeah, I think the most important thing in the world is just to document anything that you think is happening. And AI is making this easier than ever. So, there's a website that has like an app called Work Receipts, WRK receipts.com. If you visit there, they've automated the process. So you literally are just tapping a few times on your phone. And then you're creating real time timelines. And so it's little things like this that begin to change the world. There's a big push against DEI right now, but what's all that is happening because of that is it's just triggering an enormous number of lawsuits because the civil rights laws haven't changed. And so people who are pulling back on this are frankly just kind of getting sloppy with racism and sexism and things that they think they can get away with and they really can't. So that coupled with a younger generation that doesn't tolerate workplace abuse like my age folks do and that kind of documentation systems that are investigations are starting to write themselves now, so it's a high risk time for employers, and so hopefully they are taking note of that and there's ways for employees to remind them of that.
Okay, Gene.
I would say, I mean, just to address, and I had a few things what Robert had said about operational pressures versus pushback to leadership in consulting from that IT situation I gave. The thing that helped the organization was to have data. So the assessments that we provided revealed that these executives that were getting told to shut the F up and just do what you need to do, that really had a negative impact on them and impact their performance. And some of them were want to go out the back door. So data is a good way of being able to see like, hey, if I have to talk to HR, if I have to bring in a consultant to come in and just to kind of figure out how is this impacting, you want to get that real data and not just have a conversation or pushback to leadership because sometimes they don't want to hear it, but they will see real data. So if you can present that data, that definitely can help a situation.
Isaac?
I think it's so powerful to like expose yourself to these kinds of conversations. Do what Milu spoke about of like talk to the people that you work with, your managers, your peers, people you've worked with in the past about the realities of this. It can be so easy to get to a point where you're like, wow, this problem is really big and really affecting me. But if we're all building fluency and building accountability, hopefully earlier, making this part of what we talk about as people in workplaces and as people who help build workplaces, we're making each other stronger. So don't avoid it. Make it part of the conversation.
Mila, you want to share that bit of advice and maybe transition us to the next one?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think for me, again, a year ago, I went through probably one of the hardest things that I've ever had to do in my career. And that was no small feat. And I will be the first to tell you it's scary. I don't talk about it often because I really try not to let it bog me down and focus on like the negative stuff. So many good things have come out of that. And so, again, I would just say if you are experiencing where you are at a bad work environment, like do try to figure out how you can change your situation long term. Don't stay if you don't have to. Obviously, we all understand that like it's a really tough market and it's hard to get a new job. And so leverage your network. I think that's really how folks are switching in between organizations and roles. Like reach out to the people that you know. Use LinkedIn in a way that it can be magical because you can meet people like all of the folks that are on this panel today. So definitely also I would take us as a, as a quick minute as we're going to head into our next session, go ahead and connect with all of us on LinkedIn. Make sure that you have all of us, send Jean and Kim and Eliza a note to being like, hey, thank you so much. I love what you said. And I think you'd be pleasantly surprised. They'd all love to probably continue the conversation, whether that's through DMs on LinkedIn or whatever it is. So again, I want to thank you all so much for talking about workplace abuse and, how we can protect one another. I think is really, really powerful. I'm looking forward to us kind of like, I'm really glad we were able to like kick off hers with talking about something hard. I think we did that on purpose. So it'll continue to feel lighter, I think, throughout the day. I think Brian and I'm sure are probably going to get sillier throughout the day.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Jean. Thank you, Eliza, for the conversation. I think it went really well.
Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Socializing Security. We hope you learned a thing or two with us.
If you'd like to continue socializing with us on this topic or have feedback, we'd love to hear from you on LinkedIn or social media. Just search for Socializing Security. Or you can email us at info@socializingsecurity.com.
Until next time, stay social and stay secure.